Hi, so today we're going to talk about digital rights and in the scope of data privacy and cybersecurity. These are very important topics today because all of us are on our phones, on our devices for a great part of the day. And what we perhaps don't realize or pay attention to as much is what are our rights, what are our responsibilities in terms of being users, being people who store data, being people who give access to our own data. So today we have Omar Taj and I, Dr. Sarah Farid, and we are going to talk about this. Our background is that we recently did a project on data protection and privacy laws for a US company, and that gave us this idea to talk about it here and bring that information in view of the general public. Because these topics seem very technical and unapproachable a lot of the times. People think of it as very complex and perhaps may not explore it as much. And it's not as commonly known as we want it to be. So I've done my Doctor of Jurisprudence from the University of Arizona. I have an LLB from the University of London, and I have a bachelor's in economics and policy from Rice University. So I've been working as a lawyer for 8 years, and throughout my career has been very international. And that's why we are focused on these issues. So my focus is gender, as well as working with young entrepreneurs in data protection, privacy, anti-money laundering, all these issues. So over to you, Umar. Could you introduce yourself before we head on over to the main content?
Right. Thank you, Sarah, for having me on this. And definitely, it's one of the most important topic at this point in time that what data does exactly entails. But before I do that, a little bit of an introduction about myself that you already know my name, and I'm a data privacy and cybersecurity professional and certified in that very area. I did my master's in international law from the Australian National University with a specialization in cyber warfare and international security and criminal law. As a data privacy professional and a legal counsel for many other firms and companies that I do consult with, one of the most important questions that entails and what it does pops up is how do you protect data? Before you even answer that question, we need to understand that what does data does in our lives? Why is it so much of an importance? Believe me when I say that it's more like something that once at point in time the currencies were backed by different minerals and different forms of another precious metals like gold and everything. This is the gold and diamond of today's era, data itself. So that sums it up, the value and the importance behind it.
Yes, absolutely. So today's training session is powered by the Sanctuary Farid and Company and the Center for Justice, Rights and Policy, as well as Numiki Sophia and Legal Binaries. Heading on over into what we are going to discuss today. Okay. So a quick run through of what we're going to talk about is data privacy and cybersecurity, why it matters, 5 fundamental building blocks to keep it very simple and specific. We're just going to talk about 5 core concepts that we will be building on later on in the series when we talk about different things. And examples from the real world, followed by what are digital rights. So data, as we talked about, is the most valuable and the most vulnerable asset in our economy today. And it's a little hard to perhaps identify the exact value because it also depends on how much capital you raise out of it in terms of companies collect this data and then they have advertisers pay for targeted marketing to specific groups. And in that, they can raise different amounts of money. So it's kind of hard at times to put a tangible value on it. But I read recently that one Facebook user's data could be quantified at $100. So again, it is that. but it is anticipated to be like a $220 billion industry in the next 2, 3 years. Umar, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I mean, like the way you put it out there in the definition that the most one of the most valuable and vulnerable asset in our economy. At the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and perhaps it's difficult. The reason why it's difficult to even quantify data or the value behind it or the way it is backed up, but because it's priceless. It's priceless for the purposes of that in the eyes of the beholder or the people who really value it, or the
Mm-hmm.
kind of information that they're going to draw out of it. It's valuable to them, but as a person, as an individual, as a human being itself, it's one of the most inalienable right to actually own your own data. And by that, what I mean is your own information about yourself, your name, your email address, your intrinsic information about yourself, the date of birth, and everything. Even before you even dive into the value and the vulnerabilities behind this asset, we should dive into this that what's the intrinsic value or how does the ownership of data works? Because once we if I for an example, if we sign up to any sort of a social media forum and we give out our personal information, which is the basic name, email address, as our phone numbers for that matter, the
Mm-hmm.
most basic three aspect that makes us identify our uh, profile as someone that could be contacted with and communicated with, that value in itself, this data and this information is something which is an ownership of myself. It's not to be owned by someone else. It says this information is something that is owned by myself. So I have the ownership of this intrinsic or intangible asset in itself. That is the primary understanding that we don't have right now. The understanding that we have of right now about this is the in the opposite direction. That once you've given out your data, you don't own that. You don't have any
Mm-hmm.
ownership behind that. So the data subjects are the people who have this data or who does it or who are in possession of that data or who are being identified from this data. They don't own it. That's the mere understanding what commercialization, the economies and businesses around the world has given for the past 2 decades, I would say, that point.
Yeah, and we're constantly giving our data away without any sort of thought or any sort of like hesitation. I mean, whenever we use a software, application, we get these privacy notices, we get different agreements, and no one reads them. Like, I had a professor in contracts class and he was like, I don't read them and I am the one who like drafts them. So like this is my job and I don't even read one when I'm signing one and I'm giving my consent away. So it's premised on just free flowing data that we don't think about as being something personal. Like if we had our identification documents, we wouldn't just leave them out in the public, like just leave them and walk away because it can be misused in like 100 different ways. Similarly, what we're doing is the same thing in terms of that data is just digital. So it's not, doesn't feel like it's tangible or physical. And perhaps that also makes it easier to just kind of give it away and not think that anything is going to happen in the long run until it does.
Exactly. I mean, like the way you put it out there, that it's intangible by nature, that you can't touch it, you can't feel it in that
Yeah.
matter. So we don't have that kind of an association with that. Although this is something that gets us identified on so many forums. If someone needs to track down what they basically need in this digital era, and when I say that, your name and your email address is more than enough to make a profile out of you. If I do an open source intelligence, that's the first thing that we do that is being taught anywhere when you do an open source intelligence or passive scanning about someone and you need to create a profile of someone. Those two
Mm.
things are the only precursors that you require to actually create a profile, because that can tell you so much. That can tell me or any other person who does any sort of a surface level digging about any individual or an entity, just from these two things, your name and email address. That's more than enough. So imagine the value that it entails just by these two information. The rest of the information that I have, if I have your blood type, if I have your date of birth, if I have the kind of pubs that you really check into, your geolocations, your images, and other things that you leave that we do leave around, perhaps somewhat in an unreasonable manner, I would say, and not being more cautious about it. So that gives me a whole lot of things to actually create a profile about yourself, the way you behave, the way you interact with people, the way you perceive things to be, and could be used in so many ways for that purposes and for investigation. So yes, it does make me so the two terms that we have on our screen being vulnerable, valuable and vulnerable. the way they sound like, and they have the same syllables as well at the same time. But at the same time, the point being this, that the valuable, the two precursors that I just talked about, their name and email, this even in itself makes your data valuable, and at the same time, these two only things makes you vulnerable over the cyberspace. That's how this asset is one of the most valuable and vulnerable asset in our economy. To sum it up,
Yeah, that's
right?
very nicely put because there's like two sides of the same coin. Where it's valuable, it's also vulnerable. So, like, how do we go about protecting it?
Yep.
Yes. So this is a map that is showing how many internet users there are and how many people are logging on, excuse me, from around the world. So as you can see in developed countries such as the US or Europe, there is there is a higher prevalence of usage and users. And this is a map from 2013, but by 2023, it's estimated that there are 20 billion devices from that have doubled from 10 billion only 10 years ago. So usually a person has a laptop and at least a phone, or perhaps they have two phones, they may have a tablet. So counting all of those, one person could have more than one or two devices at a single time that they're operating.
Yep, that's true. I mean, like, maybe this number would go to five or something for a person like me who's into cybersecurity and data protection, because
Yeah.
like I'm and it could be just a one or two users for a normal person, or perhaps like someone who just uses it for the purposes of social media interaction and for daily use. But that this number has actually drastically improved, as you said, and it has actually gone bonkers, if I would say that's the correct word, to the way technological rapid movement have been, and the drastic change that we have seen post COVID, because of the remote work settings and hybrid settings that emerged all over the world globally. That has also surged the way people use devices, and there was a huge surge in the demand and supply of electronic communication devices all over the world during that period of time. Just like in a matter of just 2 years or 3 years, you have seen a huge surge of about almost 100% or maybe 200% in that part. Yep.
Yes, and especially with the recent COVID crisis, there
Yep.
has been people stayed indoors more and they're just used to that even more so now than going out.
Yep.
And, like they're spending more time online for sure. Okay, so moving on to our one of five definitions. The first one is personal data, and the second one is PII. So, Umar, would you like to elaborate on this?
Right. Like, so starting on with the personal data, as the name suggests itself, that it's really personal to yourself. But before even we go that, if I would say that like, it's like personal data is more like any sort of information that you have which relates to any living individual, or who can be identified by using all of that information into a personality, or a profile can be made out of it. So it could include your name, your first name, last names, your date of birth, your email addresses, if you use it occasionally or frequently over a certain point in time, and other identifiables that are more personal to yourself, maybe your social security identification numbers or passports. Any of that matter would be counted under the personal data information. And
Mm.
other than that, it's like the other aspect, which is the PII, which is the personally identifiable information. It's the same thing, but it's just more detailed analysis of a person, where you have a more personal information or more personal data, which can actually be concluded to form a complete profile about a person, and could be directly related to that person. That would make it personally identifiable.
Yeah, and it could also be like your age, your gender, the universities you attend, because all of these together make a profile to identify that person. So, like,
Exactly.
if you know where this person went to university and their gender and all this data together, you could be sure that this is the specific person whose data you have collected from
Exactly.
different sources, even.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.